and we'll begin. Okay. Today we are starting with the nervous system. We'll cover a huge portion of the nervous system today, and if necessary, we'll continue on tomorrow. Ravi, we have a holiday on 26th, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay, chalo. So let me finish as much as possible between
I'll
today and tomorrow.
declare it tomorrow.
Okay. So this is a broad view of the nervous system of our body. This system and the endocrine system are the most important systems for the process of homeostasis in the body. What is homeostasis? It is the balance or equilibrium of the body. So the body consists of many different systems and there are interactions between these systems. So all in all, for the body to function well,
I'm just finishing up.
there needs to be homeostasis or equilibrium between the functioning of all these systems. So nervous system takes care of that. This science or the study of the nervous system is called neurology. The nervous system releases hormones. These hormones are then released into the blood and are then circulated throughout the body. What these hormones do is that they influence all the other systems to function a certain way, and thus the system enacts, or let's say ensures, there is equilibrium between the systems of the body. Now the nervous system contains a lot of structures, and the one of the minutest portions or units is called a neuron. So there are billions of neurons in the nervous system. The major parts of the nervous system include the brain, the cranial nerves. You see the image here. This is the distribution or the organs that consist together. They make up the nervous system. So we have the brain, cranial nerves, and their branches coming out of the brain. The spinal cord, the spinal nerves, and their branches. Then we have the ganglia. Now, one ganglion is not shown here. These are ganglia are collections of nervous cells or nervous tissues. Okay, then we have the enteric plexuses. So plexuses is plural. One is the plexus, and then the sensory receptors. Sensory receptors are this is just a general depiction. These are one of the sensory receptors on the skin. There are sensory receptors in the eyes as well. So receptor means they receive something. What do they receive? They receive stimulus from the outside of the body. Say, for example, there is heat. So if you touch something hot, the receptor here will convey this message to the brain. How? It will go from this path of the nervous system, and this impulse, this, let's say, transmission of that particular sensation is called an impulse. So this impulse travels from here up to the brain or the spinal cord, wherever it is supposed to travel. The body reacts to it, and within a few seconds or within a few microseconds, you get an impulse back to this part of the body that you should move away, and you quickly snatch your hand away from the source of the heat. Okay, so this process is very fast. It takes milliseconds. That is why if you touch a hot surface or if you put your finger into fire, involuntarily, or let's say within a few seconds, your brain will give the signal and you will snatch your hand back. Okay. Now the skull, the brain is located in the skull. This bony portion is called the skull. So brain is located here. There are 12 pairs of cranial nerves which come out of this portion, the end part of the brain. You can see this portion. A nerve, these cranial nerves are bunches or bundles of thousands of neurons or axons. Axon is a part of a neuron. They also have blood vessels and connective tissues come out of it. Then there is the spinal cord. This connects to the brain, and it also has bone surrounding it to protect it. Now, since this part controls the entire body, it is supposed to be essential to a life or to the normal functioning of the human body. So, the brain and spinal cord bear the brunt of all our interactions, or they take care of all our interactions, which is why they are protected in bony cages. So the most important parts, for example, the heart is located in a bony cage, the lungs are located in a bony cage, or our thorax, we know that as the rib cage. Similarly, the skull and the vertebral column is what protects the nervous system from the outside trauma, any outside trauma. So there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves that come out from the spinal column. And all these spinal nerves go into the entire trunk region and trunk and extremities. These provide the nervous support. So the nerve impulses travel from the trunk and extremities into the spinal cord, and they carry the sensations or the action potentials back into our extremities and trunk. Other than the spinal nerves, we have ganglia. These are small knot-like structures or swellings which contain a lot of nervous tissue. Then we have the next enteric plexuses. These enteric plexuses are also extensively made up of neurons. These generally help regulate the enteric means something that lies inside, and it is also related to the digestive system. So the enteric plexuses help regulate our digestive system. Then we have sensory receptors, which are small cells that monitor the changes throughout externally as well as internally. For example, we have these receptors in the eyes. Now, in the eyes, these are called as photoreceptors. So, in the retina of the eye, we have photoreceptors which accept the signal or receive the signal from the outside. What we see outside is received and it is conveyed through the nervous system to the brain. So what are the functions of the nervous system? Nervous system has multiple functions. So there is the process of sensation. We sense with the help of the nervous system. So we sense smell, we speak through it. There's also remembering, or let's say the entire process of the brain. So remembering whatever we have remembered, we store it. So we take some information, store it, and keep it. And at the relevant time that information is required, the brain accesses the stored information and we can speak it out, either remember it or we can speak it out. It also regulates the internal organs and the body. So it controls the body movement and the movement and workings of the internal organs. This is divided broadly into three functions basically. So sensory function is, there are some internal stimuli. For example, there is increase of acidity in the blood. This is one of the internal stimuli that the body gives out. And the nervous system conveys this to the brain and that is worked upon. Similarly, external stimuli, for example, what we just saw is, if we put our finger into the fire, it will detect, the nervous system will detect that. Similarly, even minutest of the sensations, for example, if there is slight breeze or wind and even a few of the hairs on our body or our hand move, the body can detect it with the help of the nervous system. This information is then carried into the brain. Then there is the processing of all the sensory information that we get. This is the second function, which is called the integrative function. So all the information that we receive is next processed, and some decisions are made based on the input that we receive. This is the integration of the nervous system. So it is integrated into the body. And next is the motor function. So motor function is Once we receive sensory information, it is integrated, that is processed in the body, and then there is a function which responds to that particular stimulus. This is the motor function. So receiving a stimulus of heat, processing that it is heat and our body needs to get away from the heat, and then actually working on that with the help of our muscles, muscles and bones. So that is called, that working part is called the motor function. The reaction that we give is the motor function. So our muscles contract. For example, if there was a heat stimulus, the muscle contracts and we take our hand back. Then the nervous system is divided into different parts. There are two main divisions, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So the central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord, and peripheral nervous system includes everything else. So then what is this everything else? So it is the spinal nerves, their branches, cranial nerves and their branches, the ganglia and sensory receptors throughout the body. These all come under the peripheral nervous system. Only the main portion of the brain and the spinal cord in the vertebral column are under the central nervous system. So one of the smallest units of the nervous system is a neuron. So what neurons do is, all the basic functions of the nervous system are done by neurons with the help of neurons. So for example, the sensations that travel through the body, neurons do that. The traveling of sensations or the movement of sensations from one point to the next is done with the help of neurons. Thinking, remembering, controlling our muscles, regulating our hormones, whatever is necessary, this takes place with the help of neurons. So I'll show you the structure of a neuron. You can see the neuron here.
Ah, yes.
Okay. So a neuron has different parts. Two of the main parts are a dendrite. So this portion, the outside are called the dendrites. This is what transmits the information from one neuron to the next. I'll show you that part also. First, we'll understand how a neuron looks and which portion transmits. Okay. So this part is the axon. That is the body of a neuron. And these are the dendroids. Now there are multiple neurons that transmit information from one neuron to the next. So these dendrites connect with the dendrites of the next neuron. Okay, there are different types of neurons. This is just the basic idea of how the traveling of nerve impulses works. So these dendrites are transmitting information from one portion of one neuron to the next neuron through the dendrites of that other neuron. So they'll be connected somewhere here. Connected as in not exactly touching, but that's a process we'll look at later. Okay. So these are the two main parts of the neurons. Dendrites are branches like trees. So they can move out. Sometimes what happens is, let's say a part of the body is cut. You must have heard of, if a body part is cut out, it does not regenerate. Okay, so if your hand is cut, if your finger is cut, if your part of your thumb is cut, it does not regenerate. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
doesn't grow back.
it doesn't grow back. In some animals, some parts do grow back, but not in humans. But the nervous system is a little bit more resilient. So if a body part is cut off, what happens is the nerves in that portion are broken. So for the time being, there are no nerves or the ends of nerves in that part of the body. But little by little, these grow back. Okay. Now, although they regenerate, they do not regenerate completely. So it's not an unlimited potential. That is why when, say, for example, we must have heard of people who've broken their back or the spinal column, and in spite of that, some of those get back to their routine after a certain amount of time, let's say a year or a number of years. You heard of such cases? Yeah, this is because the nervous system grows back to a certain extent. Now, when does it not grow back? So, in certain cases, these neurons or these dendrites regenerate, but sometimes the distance between these two neurons is more than, let's say, 3 centimeters. In that case, they cannot connect back. So, if just a portion of that nerve is broken, say for example, I had a patient who recently had surgery. During the surgery, her nerve was cut by mistake, not on intention, by mistake. A certain portion of her nerve was cut. Because it was cut, she lost sensation of a part of her leg. Now, slowly over time, this part, the nerve was reconnected. But even though it is reconnected manually, even if you join it back, you stitch it back, these structures, the internal structure needs to regenerate. So it is now slowly regenerating. She's got back some sensations. Okay. Does not have all her sensation back, but she's got back some sensations. We are helping her with that. And we are hoping that the nervous system will rejoin, that part will regrow, regenerate, and she'll be back to normal. Okay. You get till this part. So the nervous system can regenerate, but the regrowth is very slow and it is not infinite. Okay, so there is a point at which there is no potential for regrowth. Now the place where two neurons meet or communicate with each other is called a synapse or synapse. This synapse contains small tiny sacs or vesicles that have chemicals in it. These chemicals are called neurotransmitters. So if you look at the structure here, this portion and the connection with the next, this connection is called a synapse. And there are small neurotransmitters in this region. So what happens is we receive a sensory stimulus. The neurotransmitters are released. They communicate with the neurotransmitters of the dendrites that are on the opposite side. So the neurotransmitters released here will communicate with the dendrites of the next part. So there is an electrical impulse which is conducted here. It is converted into a chemical impulse with the help of neurotransmitters. And this chemical impulse is then again converted into an electrical impulse at the next neuron. Got it? Yes. So synapse is a place where chemical transmission takes place. Is this part clear?
It's clear to me. Everybody else, I don't know.
Am I going too fast?
No, it's okay. It's clear.
Clear? Okay. Okay. So let's delve a little bit into the functions or functional classification of these neurons. So there are different types of neurons, three main: sensory or afferent. So afferent neurons or sensory neurons convey the action potential into the central nervous system through the cranial or spinal nerves. So afferent always means towards, okay, towards the center. Efferent means away from wherever the center is, usually. So sensory or afferent neurons will carry the impulses into the central nervous system. Efferent or motor neurons will carry these impulses away from the central nervous system. Okay, where is this away? This will be towards the muscles or organs,
Towards
wherever
the
that,
outer.
yeah. So this
Outward.
will be carried outward from the center of that particular system. Okay. And the last is association or interneurons. Association neurons or interneurons will process all the information that the sensory neurons carry. After processing this, they will give all this information to the efferent or motor neurons. So this is how the sensory neurons, sorry, nervous system neurons function. Okay, this is just the basics. Now, every neuron has a sheath. Let's say not every neuron has a sheath, but most neurons, the axons of each neuron has a sheath. If you see the image that I have shared, this particular portion, you see me pointing to it. Hello? Do you see something called a myelin sheath?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I can.
Huh. So most neurons are surrounded by a myelin sheath, which is made of lipid and proteins. Now this myelin sheath functions as a covering of the axon, and also it increases the speed of every impulse that the neuron carries ahead. Okay. So usually what happens is the process of myelination. Myelination is covering that particular axon with the myelin sheath. This myelination is, let's say, continued throughout life. So an axon may have as much as 100 myelin layers at a time. Like there are multiple layers of paper, it is covered in multiple layers. Now there are gaps in this sheath. They are called the nodes of Ranvier. It's here. Do you see this? The nodes of Ranvier.
Yes.
This is, yes. So this is where there's a slightly swollen structure, a node-like structure, which is why it is called the node of Ranvier. So there's a difference between myelinated and unmyelinated neurons. So unmyelinated neurons do not have this myelin sheath. Now this myelin sheath continues to increase or grow from birth to maturity. Okay. What difference does it make? So as the myelin sheath grows, it increases the speed of conduction of nerve impulse. So for example, when a baby is small and around the time that it starts to talk, myelin sheaths are formed partially. Okay. So that is why a child's response to the nervous stimuli is not as fast or even as coordinated. It's kind of clumsy. If you've noticed children, they are kind of clumsy. So even when they feel certain stimuli, for them to react, it is not, that reaction is not as quick. But as the children grow, by their teenage years, by maturity, these sheets fully develop. So the responses of a teenager are much faster as compared to a toddler or a child. So in certain diseases, this myelin sheath is destroyed. So one of those is multiple sclerosis. Now, because of multiple sclerosis, a person may have different problems. We'll discuss this condition later. What happens when the myelin sheaths are gradually destroyed? Okay. Next, we'll go on to ganglions. A ganglion is a bundle or a cluster of neuronal cell bodies. It's a part of the peripheral nervous system. Then we have a nerve, which is a bundle of axons together. It's also a part of the peripheral nervous system. Then in the brain, if you've heard, we have gray matter and white matter. Okay. We also have these two in the spinal cord. So the regions that are white, it's based on color. The regions that are white and kind of glistening, they have a glow. So they are the white matter. They are called white matter. This white matter is myelinated tissue. These are myelinated neurons and axons.
Are you showing that image? No, no.
I'm not showing the brain. Okay. And gray matter has unmyelinated axons. There are blood vessels in the brain around both the white and gray matter. In the spinal cord, the outer white matter, there's the white matter is outside and the gray matter is inside. Okay, the spinal cord is shaped like a butterfly if you look at a cross section of it. Let me see if I have an image.
What happened? Hung.
Okay. No, 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 I'm here. I'm just trying to locate the image of a spinal cord. I'll share it later. I don't have access to it right now. Okay. You can see here the afferent and efferent nerves. Do you see this?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is the source of heat. This stimulus is conducted from the skin. This is the skin by the afferent nerves. These nerve endings transmitted to the brain. The brain instructs or gives impulse to the efferent nerves, and these signals are transported to the hand, to the skin near the fire, and you pull your hand back.
Yeah, all of this happens within
Within a few seconds, microseconds.
microseconds, yes.
Yes. Okay. Now let's move on and learn a little bit about the central nervous and peripheral nervous system.
Mm.
So the central nervous system has contains the brain and spinal cord, as we saw. It is the source of our thoughts, emotions, and memories.
I'll get it.
It controls the muscles and the glands. So it also is in control of the hormones that these glands secrete. The peripheral nervous system controls all the nervous tissue that is outside of these two organs, that is the brain and the spinal cord. So it has cranial nerves, their branches, spinal nerves branches, the ganglia, sensory receptors. Now, the peripheral nervous system is again divided into three parts. One is the somatic nervous system, one is the autonomic, and one is the enteric. So the enteric nervous system, it's easy. It controls the plexuses. The enteric plexuses that we saw provide nervous tissue to the gastrointestinal tract. Let's look at the somatic and autonomic nervous system. The sensory information that is taken in by the somatic receptors in the head, body, the entire body, the limbs, these are transported to the brain, to the CNS. So, for example, this includes the vision, hearing, taste, and smell. And then the motor neurons conduct information or impulses from the central nervous to the skeletal muscles. So, out of this, the transmission of energy or transmission of impulses into the central nervous system is involuntary, but the transmission outside to the skeletal muscles is this will control this is under voluntary control. Okay, so only a part of the workings of the peripheral nervous system of this subdivision is voluntary. The next is autonomic nervous system. It has neurons that will convey information from autonomic sensory receptors in the visceral organs. Visceral are the organs that are inside the body. So the stomach and lungs. So it will convey information from this to the central nervous system. And it has motor neurons that will convey the impulses from the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord to these muscles or to the nerves connecting to these internal organs. So the ANS or the autonomic nervous system is also involuntary. Okay. Then let's look at some definitions. There is something called an action potential. So neurons communicate with each other with the help of action potential. For example, a muscle fiber contracts because it has got an action potential impulse from the brain that was conveyed to that particular muscle fiber or fibers. So the brain receives a stimulus. Something that comes from the outside is called a stimulus. That is the energy that activates a receptor cell in the body. This stimulus then is passed on to the brain. The brain gives out something in the form of energy, in the form of action potential, which then is communicated to the muscles. Okay. Can someone tell me what are neurotransmitters? We've just taken a look at neurotransmitters.
I'm refraining.
Yeah.
Come on, people.
Neurotransmitters are the transmitters which propagate the stimuli.
Correct. So these are usually located where? At the tail end, at the dendrite region or the synapses between two nerves. Okay. These are
Yeah.
chemicals that transmit. In short, these are chemicals that will transmit messages between the nerve cells, between one neuron to the next. Okay. This process is called synaptic transmission, which will take place at a neural synapse. I've shared the next image with you. You see here, there are two neurons that you can see. Is the image visible?
Can you make it a little bigger?
Yes.
Mm.
Hold on. Is it visible?
Yes, but you have to move it little.
Okay, hold on, hold on. I'll enlarge the image. You see it
Perfect.
now?
Perfect.
Let me reduce the size. Okay. You see this? The
Yeah.
entire thing from one neuron and the other neuron. So these
Yes.
are two different kinds of neurons.
Mm.
Why? Because this part
One
will
is
not
myelinated,
have
one
the
is not.
myelin. Yes. So this does not have a myelin sheath. And this part has the myelin sheath. So this is where an impulse begins. And this impulse, now this is at 1 millisecond. So this impulse is received and it will travel through this part and then move on to the next. At 1 millisecond, if it was here, at 10 milliseconds, it will be somewhere here. This will just show you how fast a myelinated neuron will transmit information. So it will be here at the 10 millisecond mark. But this part, the myelin sheath, makes the process so fast that at the end of 10 milliseconds, this particular impulse will have traveled to almost here, almost at the end of this particular neuron.
Mm.
Okay. So this particular conduction of an impulse is called one second. This is continuous conduction, this part, because it is a continuous conduction of that impulse. There is nothing in between. But these myelin sheath, and the nodes of Ranvier help the impulse leap from one part to the next. This type of conduction is called a saltatory conduction.
Can you say that again? What conduction?
Saltatory, Saltatory.
Okay, saltatory.
Saltatory. Okay. So, I'll give you an example here of how this conduction can be interrupted sometimes. So when we say that a nerve impulse is conducted at a very high rate, if you have a burn, there are certain things that affect the conduction of this. So heat will increase the conduction and cold will reduce the conduction. So when we have a burn, what do we say? Apply ice immediately. What will that do? It will slow down the conduction of nerve impulses along these axons. Okay. So always the conduction of nerve impulses is high when there is increased temperature or warmth, and it is slow when we have decreased temperature. This applies in regions where there is extreme cold. So if you've gone out where there is ice, now we don't have ice here, but if you've gone out somewhere where there is a lot of ice, what happens is you lose sensation in your peripheral regions, right? That is where the sensation is lost first. It is one of the reasons that people don't realize when they are out in the cold too long that their hand is frozen hand or foot. So in such cold regions where there is a lot of ice and snow,
She's going back.
people lose limbs because of this. So the conduction of pain doesn't take place in a normal manner, and you may have to amputate a finger or toe because of this. You've heard of this part?
Yes.
Okay. Then let's look a little bit at how anesthetic works. So if you go back to the earlier image, this part will conduct. Hold on. Do you see my screen?
Yeah, but the same image is there.
Same image. Okay, fine. I'll explain on this. So this is one of the reasons. This is the impulse, the green part. This impulse will travel from one point to the next. So it will travel like this from this point to the end, and then it will move on to the next neuron.
Are you
What will,
showing something with your cursor?
yes, that's why
I
I'm
can't
asking
see
whether
it.
you see it.
No, I can't see your cursor.
Do you see it now?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it keeps
Oh.
disappearing. Can you put a red color?
Okay, I don't know how to do that, Deval. Could you tell me?
Go to annotate in your menu.
Annotate. Okay.
Yes, and then there is a highlight or something like that.
I don't see. So I have mouse, select text, draw, stamp, spotlight,
Spotlight.
format, spotlight. What do you see? Do you see a change?
We see
No.
a pencil.
Okay, fine. That works.
Yeah.
So what was I
there should be a
explaining?
red number somewhere.
Okay, it's
Sorry.
fine, Deval. We don't need to do that. I'll just speak out. So this green portion that you see, this portion travels from this point to the next. These are the ions that carry the impulse. What happens with a local anesthetic is this green portion, the ions are blocked. Okay, so the local anesthetic will block the transmission of these ions. Because of the blockage of this portion, the nerve impulse cannot go from one point to the next. So if it is blocked here, it will not move on to the next neuron. If it doesn't move on to the next neuron, we will not have those pain impulses. So even when a patient undergoes a surgery, there will be pain, but that pain will be stopped at that point. It will not be conveyed to the brain. Okay. If it is not conveyed to the brain, what happens? You will not experience that pain. It will be there, that part will be cut, but you will not experience it. And if you don't experience it, you will not move away from it.
Mhm.
Okay.
So which is useful for surgeries and stuff.
It's useful for surgeries. That is why we just spoke about anesthesia. That's how an anesthetic works. It blocks that particular process from happening. The ions don't move from one point to the next. So they cannot carry the impulse, the electrical impulse.
Mm.
Okay, now let's take a small look at neurotransmitters. Let's take a
GABA.
quick look at how this particular thing happens.
Mm. Synapse.
Huh. So this is a synapse. This is just one part of a synapse. So there are multiple thousands of synapses in one particular nerve tissue. Okay. What happens here is the nerve impulse that is traveling from the axon. It moves on into the dendrites. These are the ions that jumpstart the process. This part is where the transmission will take place from one dendrite to the next. So these small packets of neurotransmitters travel from this point they travel to the end of the dendrite. Here they are released into the synaptic cleft. Okay. Once they are released here, they travel to the next dendrite or the next neuron. Once they travel to the next neuron, this part is the chemical transmission. This particular part is the chemical transmission. Up till here, it would be the electrical transmission of that particular nerve impulse. It moves to the next one. Here again, this is the postsynaptic neuron. So this is the synaptic cleft. This is the part after this is the next neuron. Let's say this is the next neuron. Here is where it will be converted back into an electrical impulse. So the neurotransmitters are accepted. Then again, at the other end, they will travel back like this. So the neurotransmitters end up somewhere here, and again it is converted into an electrical impulse. So the process is clear.
Yes.
Okay. So there are several neurotransmitters in our body. One of those is acetylcholine. Then there are others like glutamate, aspartame, serotonin. As a doctor, whoever
GABA also, no? GABA.
yes, GABA.
Gamma. I
Yes,
forget the full name. Butyric acid.
gamma aminobutyric acid.
Yes.
So we have GABA as well. Then there is glycine. Then we have serotonin. One specific example of serotonin is that there's a drug called Prozac, which is used for depression. What this drug does is this drug blocks the reuptake. Reuptake is taking in.
Hmm.
So in a particular synapse, if serotonin is secreted, the next neuron will not take in the serotonin. So this particular drug acts only on the serotonin. So it will not take in the serotonin, and therefore serotonin impulse, the impulses transmitted by that will not travel to the brain. Okay. So what SSRIs or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors do? Why selective? Because they will inhibit only serotonin. So drugs like Prozac stop the activity or prolong the activity of this particular neurotransmitter. And they are used for conditions like depression, some forms of depression, not all. Okay. Just one example of how serotonin works. This is a very general example. Serotonin will work in any different scenarios as well. There are different effects. But if you've eaten a good meal, what a food, what a good meal contains are proteins. Now, these proteins then manufacture neurotransmitters. So, there are chemicals in our food. These chemicals will give out neurotransmitters. Okay. So, when we eat food, some neurotransmitters are generated and they will lead to certain sensations. So, the neurotransmitters which are made from amino acids, which come from proteins. So, when amino acids are digested, what will happen is they will generate these these inhibitors, these neurotransmitters, one of which is serotonin. So if you had a good meal, a heavy meal, a large meal, you will be relaxed and sleepy. Yeah, everyone has experienced that. This particular effect is because of serotonin. Okay, there are others as well. Now, if you have a large protein meal, it doesn't work the same because a high protein meal also contains other neurotransmitters. So the difference here is that you do not need to have a large protein meal to get good sleep, but instead, uh, you can have things, carbohydrates like bread, pasta, potatoes, or rice. We have more of rice. So what carbohydrates do is they do not inhibit the processing of other neurotransmitters. So the amino acids will secrete out certain neurotransmitters. All these neurotransmitters then compete against each other to get transmitted to the brain. Now, when they are competing against each other, the part of serotonin that is absorbed is less. Okay. Now, because this is a certain, let's say, category, they will compete against each other. So the amino acids and the neurotransmitters derived from proteins will compete against each other. Okay. Those from carbohydrate rich foods will compete against each other. So if you have a high protein meal, you will not be as sleepy as if you have a high carbohydrate meal, because a high carbohydrate meal will allow the serotonin to be absorbed better. Okay. It's a little bit difficult to understand, but just understand that serotonin will have certain effects. Similarly, we have other neurotransmitters like norepinephrine, dopamine. Norepinephrine will help us wake up from sleep. It will help in regulating our mood. Then we have dopamine, which will help us have the emotional responses that we have, addictive behaviors, or even pleasurable experiences. Okay. Then we have endorphins. This is very interesting because it directly correlates with acupuncture. Endorphins are the neurotransmitters that are the natural painkiller of a body. So when we do acupuncture, when we needle a patient, what happens is the body produces endorphins, more endorphins. So there is something called acupuncture analgesia. Right? Ravi used to tell us that there is something called acupuncture anesthesia, in which you can perform an operation or surgery on a patient after giving them acupuncture, right, Ravi?
I think he's not there.
He's not there. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Huh. So
There are
this
2 or 3
connects,
points now.
yes. So this connects directly with the neurotransmitters endorphins. Okay. Endorphins also increase or improve the memory and learning and feelings of pleasure. Okay. So there are some substances and drugs that modify the effects of these neurotransmitters. So for example, if a person has asthma attack, what happens is a drug called isoprel or isoproterenol is given, which will dilate the airways. because it activates the receptors for norepinephrine. Norepinephrine will help in dilate the pathways of the bronchi. That is why it will help with a patient who has an acute attack of asthma. We'll stop here for today. There are some common disorders.
Okay.
I wanted to speak about multiple sclerosis, in which there is destruction of the myelin sheaths in the central nervous system. Okay. Now, if this progresses, firstly, a patient may have weakness of the muscles, heaviness in the muscles. There will be abnormal sensations or even double vision. And this will increase as time goes by. As the demyelination progresses, this will increase. Slowly, the patient will lose their muscle control. Okay. So this is how multiple sclerosis functions.
Heart is also a muscle.
Yes, it will not affect the heart directly, Devan.
Okay.
Okay. So then we have epilepsy, which is another disorder linked to the nervous system. We'll look at epilepsy later. We are almost done with the time.
Okay.
We'll have
Okay.
questions at 0 hour because we can, I guess, let's see next session if we can have questions, Ravi. If we finish the nervous system
No,
in the
no,
next
no.
section, next session. Okay, fine.
No, 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 no.
0 hour.
We will always have question and answers. 0 hour.
Okay, fine. ठीक है चलो. So we'll stop for today. I'm stopping the recording.
Yeah.